see me. Is that the case? What's the chat saying, Christine? Can hear me or can see me? Oh, right. Hey, way to go. So sorry about that delay, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes the computers get plagued with technical problems. Well, today was one of those days. Anyhow, let's get cracking. Says he. So welcome to the third lesson in the Be Safe in Your Space for Preteens program. I'm Gary Simmons. Last week, we examined two specific breathing techniques that can be used for keeping disconnected from a troublemaker. We looked at some techniques for teaching children how to calm down from being angry and upset. We examined the concept of how the eyes are the window to your soul and the conduit in which a troublemaker tries to connect with us. We looked at exactly what a submissive eyeline and a neutral eyeline looks like and how they work. We also discussed exactly where to look if ever you or your child is inadvertently faced with a troublemaker and when to do it. And we looked at exactly what to do if your child is being subjected to ongoing abuse or harassment at school that can't seem to be resolved. The aim of last week was to give you some effective techniques for situations where you may find yourself face to face with a troublemaker, so then you'll be able to transfer these skills onto your child or any other family member. So let's get started with lesson 3. Remember in the last lesson how I referred to what's commonly known as body language as being physical expression in the Be Safe in Your Space curriculum? I'd now like to explore this concept in more detail. Physical expression is a major component in knowing how to be safe in your space because, in essence, it's the way in which an individual physically interacts with other people and the way in which they indirectly demonstrate or show their personal confidence and self-esteem. As we discussed last week, if someone looks and acts like a soft touch or victim, then the world will treat them accordingly. If a person appears to be self-assured, they're far less likely to attract unprovoked negative attention than someone who's not, despite how nervous or anxious they may be feeling on the inside. For example, when people feel vulnerable, scared, or stressed, their heads tend to tilt down, the shoulders slouch, the spine becomes curved, and they tend to walk with short, scuttling steps. As we discussed in lesson 1, with this knowledge comes power. If you think about it, an actor becomes someone else by adopting a character's mannerisms, emotional responses, appearance, and voice. One of the many reasons I love acting is because it is in fact the ultimate avenue for practicing physical expression. If acting is the art of physical expression, then advertising is the science of it. Advertising uses the power of physical expression to influence how people behave, or more specifically, spend. For most actors, jobs in advertising campaigns are an important source of income. It was through my involvement in this industry where I first began to appreciate the power and importance of physical expression in everyday life, and not just in martial arts. For instance, to make a breakfast cereal commercial where there's a mum, dad, and a couple of kids who might only be seen on screen for 2 seconds, several or even dozens of people are auditioned for each character. The casting directors don't necessarily search for the best-looking people. They want actors with a physical expression or a look that captures the essence of whom the target audience identifies with, because exhaustive sales research shows that this is what motivates people to buy a particular brand. For example, if you eat ABC breakfast cereal, you'll either have more fun than you're already having. These ads often feature zany, wacky, or over-the-top types of characters who make having fun look easy. Or they could say, you could be healthier than you already are. More often than not, sports stars or people in white coats who look like scientific experts feature in these ads. Then there's the Become a Better Parent breakfast cereal ad. These ads feature individuals who look as though they are caring, sensitive and loving. Basically, in today's lesson, we're going to explore this same principle of capturing the right look for the right circumstance to be safe in your space. And undertaking to learn about the art and science of physical expression is another important step in taking control of how you interact with other people and being responsible for yourself. As with all worthwhile skills, physical expression will take some practice to perfect, so make it fun, like actors do. Over the years, I've observed through my martial arts students that kids who grasp these physical expression concepts at an early age are able to interact with their peers very confidently, which is the foundation for being able to develop a healthy self-esteem. As we discussed in the last lesson, generally all contacts between people fall into three options. Either person can be dominant, submissive, or neutral. At times when caution is required, the neutral option is best because it's a way we can manage pushy or aggressive people in an indirect way by not allowing them to force a submissive reaction from us. In the last class, we examined exactly how to breathe and to look in a way that utilizes this neutral principle. The next phase in knowing how to disconnect is knowing how to stand in relation to a troublemaker by utilizing stances, which means understanding the concept of relative positioning. In this program, my aim is not to teach you or your child Taekwondo. However, I have and will continue to borrow and modify the components within this martial art to help you be safe in your space. The reason I want to do this is because if you think about it, the physical aspects of martial art are in fact a training system where you're able to utilize the body's natural biomechanical design to operate at its peak efficiency. Consequently, stances are a major part of martial arts because they are a way of maintaining physical balance and to find an advantageous position in relation to an opponent. With this in mind, anyone can utilize the rudimentary principles of stances. Let's now look at some of the basic ones. A passive stance deployed early in an encounter with someone who's emotionally upset or in the adult world drunk can be a very effective soothing tactic, especially when enhanced with a kind voice, which we'll look at in a little while. Basically, a passive stance is standing directly square on in front of the troublemaker with feet shoulder width apart, arms open, and the hands well out to the side of your body in the preliminary stages of a big hug. You can control how passive you want to appear by the height you hold your hands and by the width you spread them apart. The lower and wider, the more passive. When using the passive stance, it's critical to be well and truly in bodyguard mode and alert in case the troublemaker perceives this passive action as a sign of weakness and a reason to escalate their harassment. For kids, the passive stance is best used when a troublemaker first begins to taunt or harass them. The best way to help your child learn this stance and others is to practice it like this. Tell them, if a troublemaker is outside of your neutral zone and still in their space, practice the passive stance by holding your hands low with the arms wide like this. Then, if the troublemaker goes onto the neutral zone, lift your arms so that your hands are about a shoulder width apart. A good way for kids to learn how wide their hands should be in the passive stance is to ask them, how big was the fish? And they may say, about this big. The key for kids doing this is being able to make an effortless transition, which is where you come in as their coach. The neutral stance is the safest way to stand during a situation that may deteriorate into a last resort. When you stand directly facing someone, your vital areas, such as the nose, jaw, throat, sternum, groin, and knees, are very vulnerable and exposed. To a violent troublemaker, these areas can be very tempting potential targets. A neutral stance allows you to be in the best possible position to quickly change into either a defending or counter-attacking position without a troublemaker noticing. The neutral stance is standing with one foot half a step forward so that when a troublemaker is on the neutral zone, your chest is at 45 degrees to them, as opposed to being square on. Also, by assuming this stance, your profile or outline is reduced by around a half or more when compared with standing front on to a troublemaker. Therefore, in this position, a potentially violent troublemaker has fewer places to target their physical attack, which means they become more predictable and consequently easier to handle. This is also the best position to be in if you need to suddenly turn and run away. As far as kids are concerned, the neutral stand with the hands up in the slightly smaller how big is the fish position is the most practical because it can be used in conjunction with a neutral eye line when a troublemaker becomes close to crossing over the neutral zone and into their space. The hand position remains the same as in the passive stance. However, by standing like this, the child is able to communicate in a more empathetic way by saying things such as, "Hey, that's not okay, Johnny. I don't like you saying stuff like that." Or, "That's so mean, Susie. Why did you have to say that? Leave me alone." Once again, the key is to utilize the finding your edge breathing, using the neutral eye line, and a seamless transition of stances. Have you got the idea, coach? I'll post a video next week that demonstrates how this is done in more detail. So far in our journey in learning how to disconnect from a troublemaker, we've examined how to breathe, where to look, and how to stand. Now it's time to examine in detail one of the most important aspects in knowing how you can be safe in your space. Specifically, I'm referring to the concept of knowing what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. My research suggests that knowing what to say, when to say it, and how are some of the biggest stumbling blocks for most people when they find themselves in situations where they must interact with a troublemaker. We're going to examine how your voice can be utilized as a very effective, non-violent self-defense weapon to help ward off an annoying troublemaker, or in a worst-case scenario, an actual physical attack. As you could imagine, there are quite a few practical applications and exercises for developing vocal skills, and this is what we're going to be exploring in depth now. Earlier on, we discussed how it's possible to nullify a troublemaker's domineering and aggressive attitude by masking our fear or anger externally with physical expression, by appearing calm and unfazed, even though on the inside we may be feeling quite the opposite. The power and effectiveness of such physical actions can be greatly enhanced by combining them with the power of the voice. In nature, most evolved animals, including apes, elephants, and dogs, use their voice as a means of bluffing and scaring potential attackers away. We can also learn a valuable lesson from nature if we effectively apply this strategy ourselves. If you think about it, as humans, in relation to knowing how to be safe in your space, we go about our daily life, interactions, and relationships with what I call our polished, civilized veneer. What I mean is that in order to survive in our complex world with its vast array of varied and dynamic social interactions, we must do so in a way that's civilized. We have our manners, our empathy for others' feelings, and we're conscious of being respectful to each other. In everyday life, we strive to be cultured, refined, and compared to animals, advanced. Ideally, in our day-to-day life, we want to interact with the world from the perspective of our civilized veneer, and we want the same from others. However, in times of major stress, or when we're forced to struggle for survival, it becomes necessary to dig down and unleash the entity that we all have that's just below the surface of our civilized veneer, which I refer to as our primal self. We need our primal selves because it's inextricably linked to our fight or flight response, which is a part of our survival mechanism. The way we can tap into our primal self at will is by utilizing our voice. A good example of tapping into the primal self is the way athletes in explosive sports such as javelin, hammer throw, weightlifting, tennis, and martial arts use their voice to maximize their concentration, effort, and focus. In Taekwondo, using the voice is known as a gihap. It's a very important technique because it's the means of harnessing and synchronizing the energy of the body, mind, and spirit. Interestingly, I've noticed that most of my adult students have to work hard in removing the internal blockages that prevent them from producing an effective gihap, while for kids, it comes easily with little or no effort. One of the main benefits of being able to utilize the voice in a gihap type of technique is that it can instantly lift your energy, evoke the fight or flight response, shock a troublemaker, and draw attention to yourself and your plight in times of trouble. In Taekwondo championships, the organisers always provide a warm-up area, and back in the day, my coach ensured that I always use it before competing. I remember often wondering how it would be possible to actually use Taekwondo for self-defense in an emergency, because obviously it's not possible to ask a troublemaker to hold on while I warm up. It was a challenging issue for me because I didn't want to break the Taekwondo creed that forbids unprovoked aggression or abuse of the knowledge I'd gained. And yet, deep down, I wanted to test myself to be confident that Taekwondo was a practical and effective martial art. My lesson came early, one freezing morning during a surf trip on the far south coast of New South Wales. Some city friends and I visited a particularly mischievous and boisterous country friend who was an expert in another style of martial arts, who also, as I was about to find out, wanted to test this Taekwondo stuff. The temperature on this particular morning was just above 0 degrees. And we were in a windy, dew-soaked cow paddock putting on damp wetsuits, stripping down to Speedos and shivering. I intended to stretch and warm up after I had my wetsuit on because my body felt quite stiff from a big week of training and surfing. As a joke, our host, still in a warm tracksuit, waited for the moment when I was standing in my Speedos and launched an attack as if he was sparring in a martial arts class. Nearly blue with cold, I begged him to stop, which only made him attack more. So I was desperately backpedaling and trying to stay out of reach. Then my training kicked in as I suddenly, automatically, and involuntarily let out a big gihap. The next thing I knew, I found myself detached and in a state of mindfulness as I watched with amazement as I began blocking, parrying, and kicking in my Speedos, just as if I'd been in a martial arts class, fully warmed up and sparring hard. This was when I first realized that the voice is the key for tapping into the spirit at any time and in any place. From that day, I've had a burning fascination with the power and versatility of the voice, such as the way it can evoke emotion through dialogue and song, or be used as a powerful weapon. Basically, the gihap technique is used to achieve a self-induced adrenaline rush at will. So if necessary, the spirit can override the body and the mind's need to limber or warm up before being used for action. I use an adapted version of this gihap technique whenever I've been forced to deal with potential violence. It's a very powerful technique that I call the vocal shock, and it's an extremely effective non-violent self-defense technique. It is in fact one of my all-time favorite moves because over the years, on several occasions, I've successfully used it to extricate myself non-violently from imminent violence. The vocal shock is also relatively easy for kids to learn if a troublemaker is constantly and persistently badgering and harassing them in a non-violent yet distressing way. The precise time to deploy the vocal shock is the exact second when a troublemaker crosses over the neutral zone into your space. I explained that concept in lesson 1. Also, if you watched a short video, Be Safe in Your Space live, I also explain it in more detail there. The key elements of the vocal shock are surprise, timing, focus, and intensity. The vocal shock is set up by subtly moving either your right or left leg forward or back half a step into a neutral stance or defensive stance, while watching and waiting as the troublemaker builds up to the action point. Just as they do, you suddenly take half a step forward. If you do this with your right foot, the momentum from the step allows you to suddenly lift your right arm and shoot it directly forward, so the point of your index finger abruptly stops about 2 centimeters from the tip of the potential attacker's nose, as you simultaneously yell or scream with a fierce inflection, "Stop right there," or "No." By suddenly and simultaneously snapping these 2 actions together from a neutral position, with the element of surprise, it's possible to create a very powerful and dramatic effect. Most troublemakers are insecure and emotionally weak. Therefore, when they're selecting victims, the last thing they want is someone who they think might not be afraid to fight back. This common weakness of troublemakers is the key area that we must exploit to our advantage if they should cross into our space, and the vocal shock is a way to achieve this in a non-violent way. Remember, the key to this move is a sudden shift in energy from being calm and neutral to a screaming beast. If this technique does not stop the troublemaker, it will in most cases at least make them hesitate, even for a moment, which may be the difference between the situation being a minor annoyance or a disaster. Another reason why I'm so fond of the vocal shock technique is that it simultaneously achieves 2 things. Firstly, as we discussed, it delivers a theatrical shock to the troublemaker, and secondly, it's nature's way of allowing us to tap into our adrenaline-charged primal self during times of danger, or to thwart unprovoked negative attention when we need it. The best way for kids to utilize a vocal shock is to explain to them that it can be used as an alternative to violence. For example, some troublemaker kids can really get into a target child's face with relentless taunting, name-calling, or mocking. As I mentioned, prior to applying the vocal shock, your child should firstly use the techniques to disconnect from the troublemaker. If the troublemaker kid sees this as a cue to up the ante, the defensive kid should immediately explode forward and scream at the troublemaker kid, "No," or "Go away." The result will be that the troublemaker kid will inevitably be stunned by the shock. At this point, train your kid to say something in a light, calm, conversational voice such as, "Ah, that's better," before they turn on their heel and walk away. Of course, it must be stressed to the child that there's to be no physical contact before, during, or after the vocal shock. In lesson 1, we discussed how troublemakers are often adept in sensing where a person's weakness or sore point is, and how they then often tend to exploit that vulnerability with a verbal attack to elicit a submissive reaction. As we've touched on throughout this lesson, we must firstly avoid connecting with the troublemaker emotionally by breath control, the eye line, and the voice. And if used properly, our voice is our #1 tool that we have for extricating ourselves out of trouble. One of the best ways to enhance the effect of the voice during an encounter with a troublemaker is the very subtle application of inflections. For example, next time you hear a news report or a professional radio announcer, listen to how they use the technique of finishing sentences with a downward inflection. Then when you're in a department store or a train station or any place where there's a non-professional on the microphone, listen to how they tend to end their sentences with an upward inflection. The reason for this is that when people feel stressed, such as by using a microphone in public or from being nervous around troublemakers, they unwittingly use the upward inflection way of talking. By utilizing the concept of communicating through the filters of either our civilized veneer and our primal self, the way we talk falls into two corresponding categories: the voice of authority and the voice of emotion. When dealing with troublemakers of any kind, it's very worthwhile to develop this confident voice of authority way of talking. Earlier, we looked at how the advertising industry uses casting, sets, and locations in a calculating and deliberate way to influence the emotions of their target audience so they'll buy a particular product. This principle is even more important in relation to the feel and tone of the voice in an advertisement. As I mentioned, the voice of a newsreader or professional announcer is the voice of authority. Listen carefully to voices in commercials that use this authority angle, such as 68 of experts agree that the power of this car is unsurpassed, or medical research suggests that the pH imbalance of brand X shampoo significantly decreases dandruff. Notice how in these types of commercial, the voice inflection goes down. Then listen to hard sell commercials. The stock take sale is now on store-wide this weekend only. Or trade in your old car on a new model this weekend and get sports wheels free. Notice how the voice inflection goes up to create excitement and urgency. Let's do an exercise where we can compare using the voice of authority and the voice of emotion together so you're able to feel it on an energetic level. So on the count of three, we'll say, I said no, with the downward voice of authority. That's immediately followed by the upward voice inflection with the voice of emotion. I said no. So we'll do it 3 times in a row. That means we have to say it 6 times. So are you ready? After the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. I said no. 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 Can you feel the different energy levels? Let's do this exercise again, except this time we'll say, please leave me alone. Are you ready? After the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Please leave me alone. 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 When I was developing my voice skills at radio school, my voice coach told me to practice my exercises with a portable recorder. The way to start this process is to read aloud from a newspaper, 1 or 2 paragraphs at a time, and then play the recorder back to analyze the flow, pace, and inflections. But as a tip, when you do read aloud, change the written words slightly in your head and say them in a natural speaking way with the downward inflection. For example, a written phrase is, she's doing it because they are going out. While in the spoken word, this phrase can actually sound like, she's doing it because they're going out. Most people cringe when they hear their own voice played back. So don't let this be a barrier. Without the state-of-the-art recording conditions, any voice will sound less than perfect to its owner. A portable recorder is only a training aid, so accept the challenge of ignoring the ego-driven distraction about how awful you sound and concentrate on your inflections. Another tip is to mimic the pace, flow, and inflections of a news presenter as you watch or listen to them on a media broadcast. Also, if you're able to give your child some formal voice training, either through singing, drama, or martial arts classes, the benefits they'll derive from this will flow right through their entire life. Obviously, techniques to control your inflections, such as the voice of authority, are quite advanced and require a level of maturity to apply them in everyday life. To begin training your child, you could set it up by asking them, who do you know who sounds really strong and powerful? They might say their school principal or a police officer or their friend's dad. This is then your leading to say, The reason they sound like this is because they know a special way of talking which can be really useful if you ever have to speak to someone who's being mean. Do you want to practice it with me? Anything to do with voice training is lots of fun because it helps to connect you with your vulnerabilities and consequently your emotions. If you time this right, you and your child will have some great quality time together while you practice this technique. Now that you understand the basics, we'll now look at some other ways in which you can teach your child to utilize their voice. In particular, I'd now like to move on to how you can brainstorm and coach your child to have an array of comebacks for those situations when they must deal with the attention of an annoying troublemaker by themselves. For the most part, troublemakers are sneaky because they often pretend to be nice and even to be a friend, so they can secure a lead-in so that you'll let your guard down and confide in them about your hopes, desires, wants, dreams, and secrets. A good general rule for when it's unavoidable to engage in a conversation with a troublemaker who you don't know is to be deliberately vague and only speak in general terms with lots of shoulder shrugs and, oh, I don't know. It's hard for kids because most likely the troublemaker who's trying to harass or antagonize them might be or was one of their friends. That's why it's critical that you, as your child's coach and tactician, spend the time with them to discuss situations that they've been in and ones they've seen others experience, as well as the situations that they've heard about. The reason is that you have to develop their confidence and remove the mystique from trouble by talking in depth about all of the various social interactions and scenarios that may arise with the potential and actual troublemakers that your child is likely to encounter. As well as that, it's important to then workshop and rehearse how these encounters are likely to transpire so that together you can demystify them. For example, if your child, Abby, was to say something like, I saw Jessica say some really mean things to Susie at school today that made Susie cry. This is your lead to say, oh, really? What kind of mean things did Jessica say? The answer might be, Jessica told Susie that she was fat and she couldn't play with us. Naturally, the thing to say here is, well, you can still be friends with Susie no matter what Jessica says, right? Then you might say, has Jessica ever said mean things to you? If it's yes, well, obviously you explore what's transpired. If it's a no, your job is not over. As a coach, you have to say, what do you think Susie should have said? More than likely you'll get a, I don't know. So then your cue is to say, the best way to not get upset when other kids are mean is to know what to say to them and how to say it so that they can't tell if you're getting upset. These are called comebacks. You want to practice a few comebacks now? It's fun, and you can be the bad guy. Great. How about you pretend you're mean like Jessica, and I'll pretend I'm Susie. Are you ready? So she'll say, you're fat, Susie, you can't play with us. Can you please just stop saying that? It's not very nice. You're fat. How would you feel if someone was saying that to you, Jessica? Ha ha, you're fat and ugly, Susie. Why do you keep saying this over and over? I heard you the first time and I don't want to play with you. Hey, Abby, do you want to play a game over here with Jade? Another good example would be, hey, Timmy, you're so gay. You're not playing with us. That's not okay, Johnny. Stop that. Oh, you're such a gay boy. How can you say that? I thought we were friends. No way, you're gay. Say whatever you want, Johnny. You're wasting your breath. And you look away. Hey, Matt, catch. Hey, do you want to play handball over here? Ha, gay boys. Oh, are you still here, Johnny? Yes, whatever. Have you got the idea? I'll include a whole list of comebacks in this week's homework that you can use, modify, or adapt to almost any situation. The key is to brainstorm, workshop, practice, and adapt. Remember, comebacks can be helpful when dealing with mean kids. However, they don't stop bullying, but they can increase confidence, which can definitely go a long way to discourage troublemakers. Also, ensure that you reinforce to your child they should never use a comeback to insult or challenge another kid. The idea is to deflect attention, not escalate a situation. Tell them that they can only use their newfound power for the forces of good, not evil. Since we're at the halfway point of this pilot program, I'd now like to change course again and get back to discussing some more conceptual ideas that I believe are extremely important for grasping the more advanced techniques, tactics and strategies for being safe in your space that we'll be exploring over the next few weeks. In particular, I'd now like to examine the concept of yin and yang. Although for some, a concept like yin and yang might sound like some kind of esoteric, new age, airy-fairy fluff. It is, however, far from that. In fact, it's a key principle of martial arts training. Let me explain what I mean. Yin and Yang is a concept that originated from ancient Buddhist teachings and in recent times has gained widespread acceptance in modern Western cultures. Basically, Yin and Yang is a philosophy that embraces both sides of any idea, situation or behavior. In Korea, where Taekwondo originated, this same concept is called and Yang and means being able to maintain a constant balance and harmony or equilibrium within the body, mind and spirit. All people need positive energy or qi to thrive. When we're centered, balanced and in harmony, qi flows into us. When we're not, it flows out. The amount of qi we have at any given time can be gauged by either the presence of good feelings, such as personal satisfaction and well-being, or the lack of them. Basically, qi is the physical field of energy that surrounds and flows into all living things. In Western terms, qi doesn't have a standard measurement or scientific explanation. However, in Asia, skills such as acupuncture, Reiki and Qigong are said to use the power of qi for healing. A simplistic analogy to describe qi could be to say that food and drink nourishes the body, while qi is nourishment for the mind and spirit. Incidentally, many people also believe that this life force flows throughout nature, buildings, and at home. The study of tapping into this type of qi is known as Feng Shui. When people become stressed and unbalanced, they create internal qi blockages within their body, mind, and spirit. Exercises, massage, and breathing techniques from activities such as yoga, shiatsu, and martial arts have evolved over thousands of years as an effective means of clearing these blockages so qi can flow unimpeded within us. Qi can be channeled through a specific area in the body at a point in the lower abdomen called the danshan in Taekwondo, or as the hara in yoga. In lesson 2 of this program, we looked at how to locate this exact point, as well as how anyone can use breathing techniques from the danshan to center themselves in times of stress. As human beings, qi is our internal power, and each individual has varying amounts of it. For example, sometimes when we meet people in everyday life, it can be a struggle to remember their name, while with others, after one meeting, their name stays in our mind forever. Invariably, memorable people tend to be the individuals who exude power, presence, charisma, or qi, and to a lesser extent, those at the other end of the spectrum, such as some of the troublemakers that we all occasionally meet, who can be memorable only to the extent where they drain our qi away. The more qi a person has within them, the more fulfilled and freer they can be in their life. This sense of freedom is the key factor that allows each individual to start growing towards and realizing their full potential, which I call reaching your zenith, which is one of the things that we will be looking at in detail next week. A lack of or a massive imbalance in qi is often the reason why some people become troublemakers and why they live their life driven by an out-of-control ego, which is another concept that we'll be exploring in more detail next week. So the Yin and Yang concept involves opposing yet complementary dualities that can be expressed within nature by obvious examples such as night and day, male and female, or north and south. Some dualities in an emotional context are love and hate, or agony and ecstasy. In the context of knowing how to be safe in a space, Some of the dualities are the voice of emotion and the voice of authority, and there's fight or flight. Yin energy is associated with femininity, the earth, moon, night, stillness, and winter. Conversely, yang energy relates to masculinity, heaven, the sun, day, heat, motion, and summer. In martial arts training, beginners explore some powerful dualities, including attack and defense, as well as effort and recovery from their very first lesson. Are you getting the idea? So, how do we engage with both yin and yang in a balanced way? Imagine the action of immersing yourself in a bath as a metaphor for engaging with life. The cold tap gives yin energy, and the hot tap provides yang energy. With a correct measure of both, it's possible to achieve a balance of temperature where the bath is an enjoyable experience and an excellent way of gaining qi. However, with too much yin, the bath becomes cold and very uncomfortable, while too much yang may even make a bath physically dangerous with the potential for burns. Extremes cause a loss of qi. Being intelligent humans, we have the knowledge and ability to control the flow of cold yin and the hot yang when we bathe. We know how to make the necessary adjustments in order to gain qi. Young children who can't safely control the flow of cold yin and hot yang must have the bath run for them at what their parent believes to be the right temperature. A young child has no control, so if the situation is not right, they lose qi and will complain noisily until the parent fixes it for them. Any person who sits around in victim mode and blames the government, the police, or anyone else for their individual problems is doing the same thing as a child crying in a bathtub waiting for someone else to adjust the yin or yang tap for them. Let's take the metaphor further. Access to hot water comes from electricity or gas, and these amenities cost money to obtain. For the vast majority of people, money is acquired by working. If, however, a person decides not to work and they can't pay their bills, they lose access to hot water. From here, there are two responses for restoring balance, either acceptance or a change in behaviour. If not having hot water or yang is upsetting or is causing stress and nothing is done to remedy it, the individual concerned will be perpetually locked into enduring the associated discomfort and inconvenience until they physically make a change. On the other hand, if a person is content with only using cold water at home, then there's no problem because the situation is in balance. Harmony for one person may be chaos for another. So it's each individual's responsibility and right to achieve harmony in their life as they see fit. The only caveat to this creed is that it must never involve maliciously affecting the body, mind, or spirit of anyone else in a negative way, and that you must always treat others in a way in which you would wish them to treat you. Anyone who's locked into a situation where they don't feel free is too far in either yin or yang. This may manifest as a loss of direction or feelings of stagnation when the body, mind, and spirit may feel stifled or even crushed. I know this from personal experience. As a young man, I worked as a contractor on large industrial sites, taking huge complexes offline for maintenance. Our teams worked around the clock on 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, for up to 3 months at a time. For me, this career was monotonous and uninspiring. At the time, I believed I'd be locked into shift work and filthy conditions for the rest of my working life. This line of work was also an exclusive male yang domain, and this time I was living in a surface house with male housemates. Besides having a girlfriend, my life was totally enveloped in an all-male yang environment. As I became more involved in martial arts training and my self-enlightenment increased, I realized that to become balanced, I needed some yin in my life. In my case, this meant that I desperately needed to be creative and do more than just sell my time to earn a living. I also needed to interact and work with women who I was not involved with on a personal level. Finally, I did something about it by enrolling in a drama, radio, and voice classes, and I pursued a risky yet stimulating field in the entertainment and media industry, which involve working with all types of colourful and talented people, both male and female. For me, leaving the oil refineries and chemical plants was a major career and lifestyle change. Unbeknown to me at the time, this step into the unknown became the turning point of my life. Until then, I was unhappy, stressed, and unsatisfied with myself. The Yin and Yang philosophy also makes it easier to accept and deal with the fact that no situation, such as a career, is always wonderful all the time. For example, within the world of entertainment, I went on to discover that challenging and sometimes harsh dualities where stints of exciting, highly paid work with interesting people were inevitably followed by enforced periods of lonely unemployment. For some people in the entertainment business, this fact can be very debilitating to the spirit and finances. Instead of being a victim about unemployment, I maintained my chi during these downtimes by throwing myself into my martial arts training, even if it didn't make good economic sense at the time. I remember feeling how the effort spent in the dojang or training room gave me far more chi than enduring uninteresting work for low pay, which I found I could survive without by careful budgeting. As it turned out, the knowledge and experience I gained throughout this period was the foundation for my successful business today. And I've met many others with similar stories. The main point I'm making here is that a frustrated or dissatisfied person can restore their balance or chi through a change of attitude or circumstances. If that change is from the heart and is based on an honest self-analysis, the change will work out for the best in the long run, even though, as in my case, it didn't seem clear at the time as to how it would be so, especially to the other people in my life. Before finding the courage to change my yin and yang imbalances, I could never have imagined how free and creative my life and career could be. I now believe, which is the only opinion that matters on this issue, with maybe the exception of my wife Christine, that the sky is the limit with mine. It was possible for me, from feeling as negative as I did to being as positive and inspired as I am now. It's also definitely possible for you to feel the same way about yourself. When people are uncentered, they tend to look at their situation or relationship through filters that block certain parts of their judgment. More often than not, these filters are the result of stress causing emotional blockages or feelings that are not expressed, such as fear, frustration, resentment, anger, even love. No one likes to feel stress, especially kids. So most people have a personal way of purging it to regain their sanity. Some gain chi by exercise, a sport, or from a hobby. However, by nature, troublemakers often cannot purge their stress, so they tend to vent it onto other people. More often than not, in the adult world, drugs or alcohol are the triggers that troublemakers use for this. Feelings such as siege mentality and survival mode are a surefire indicator that the body, mind, and spirit are experiencing some major chi imbalances. Becoming centered or balanced enables people to emotionally detach from their problems so that they can clearly see and recognize the real issues involved. And in lesson 1, we looked at how our higher self can achieve this. This clear thinking also facilitates the self-control that makes it possible for an individual to evaluate in a genuine way if they're directly or indirectly causing the stress issues in their life. And if they are, it can also give them the impetus needed to begin remedying it. When it comes to knowing how to be safe in your space, the Yin and Yang principle can be applied as an effective non-violent self-defense tactic by utilizing the principle of opposing dualities in a more tangible and physical way. In particular, I'm referring to a strategy of assuming the opposite demeanor or energy to a troublemaker. For example, if someone is attacking by ranting and raving, instead of yelling back on the same energy level and increasing negative energy, it may be more appropriate to assume a low-key position by being soothing and calming. Sometimes humoring a troublemaker with the intent of diffusing the situation is the right tactic. Alternatively, if a troublemaker shows any signs of self-doubt or a lack of confidence, it may be more appropriate to shock or psych them out by being assertive, confident, and in control. The idea is to non-violently rattle an assailant's confidence, focus, and timing by responding in the opposite way to them by being either passively yin or assertively yang. This tactic can also help to indirectly reassure an insecure potential troublemaker that you're not competing against them by being louder, tougher, smarter, etc. This principle is called the carrot or the stick principle, and we'll look at this in more detail next week. Some other possible opposite responses to a troublemaker's unwanted attention is being friendly and funny, cold and menacing, or kind and caring. It totally depends on the circumstances of the moment. The general principle for doing this is to initially respond to a troublemaker's antics in a neutral and impassive way while in bodyguard mode to grasp all the variables and dynamics of the encounter. Basically, this strategy is about deploying the same bluff techniques and methods that troublemakers use against them so they back down. The only difference is in motivation. Good people utilize these kinds of offensive tactics only to either escape or control an attack, as opposed to a troublemaker whose motivation is solely to receive self-gratification at the expense of someone else. Of course, with kids who are inexperienced or unskilled with emotional intelligence and life skills, knowing which option is correct for a particular situation can be difficult. If you can understand yin and yang, and then in turn help your child to understand the basic principles, it will definitely help them to become safe in your space, because yin and yang can be used as a framework in which kids and adults alike can gain chi to become balanced or centered and impervious to troublemakers. Mastery of this principle is an excellent way to discover how we can indirectly enrich our lives to an extent where we can safely and confidently interact with anyone we may ever meet and move towards our ultimate potential. Didn't we cover a lot in today's lesson? We looked at how the power of physical expression influences the way in which people behave towards us. We examined how stances, or the concept of relative positioning to a troublemaker in a particular situation, is another subtle way to control a first encounter. We looked at what to say to a troublemaker, as well as when to say it and how. We looked at distinguishing how we have a civilized veneer, as well as what I refer to as our primal self. We looked at the voice of authority, as well as the voice of emotion. We examined what comebacks are and how you can train your child to use them. We looked at how troublemakers often pretend to be nice and to even be your friend so they can secure a lead-in with the intention of getting you to let your guard down. We explored how to use the vocal shock technique, and we examined what yin and yang is and how it's applied in everyday life. And we looked at how to gain chi or energy and how to lose it. And we watched on how to respond to a troublemaker with the opposite energy. Your homework for this week is to practice developing the voice of authority with your child. Explain how it's the type of voice that's best used when someone is being mean or unpleasant, and how newsreaders and even police officers use this voice to get people's attention and to appear strong. Also, I'd like you to brainstorm some comebacks with your child so they're prepared with some effective things to say instead of being faced with a troublemaker and being tongue-tied. I'll include a long list of effective comebacks with the homework, so look out for the homework email tomorrow. So, next week we're going to explore some practical situations that utilize the principle of yin and yang. We're also going to examine some strategies about coaching those kids who tend to get into trouble due to an overdeveloped need to be the center of attention. We'll look at what you can do if your child may have the potential to become a troublemaker. We'll explore how the ego can potentially be troublemaker number one or your greatest ally. We'll look at the concept of gaining and losing face and how important this is in playground politics. And we'll look at the concept of gaining, and lastly, we'll look at how you can compartmentalize, how your kids can compartmentalize their life and friends to help them have relationships with the people who enhance their lives and not detract from it. And we'll look at some practical solutions if your child is struggling with issues such as being excluded. In the meantime, if you have any comments or questions about today's lesson, please type them into the message box, post them on our Be Safe in Your Space Facebook community page, or send an email. So thanks for being here this evening. I look forward to hearing how you go with the lessons and homework from this week. And if there's any questions, just type them into the chat box. Christine's in charge of the chat box. Okay. Well, yep, you can see in here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll wrap it up for now. Remember, if you've got any questions, please send them to me. And this chat facility is recorded, so if any messages came through or questions I missed, I'll be able to get a copy of it and answer them in detail a bit later on. So until next week, look out for your homework email, and I'll see you there.